Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is another short, true encounter report from a good friend of mine, Mr. D.Holley. Some of you may know for his fictional writing skills, but also his own Bigfoot and Sasquatch research with the Timberline Bigfoot group. Do check them out over on Facebook and check out the Legacy Project Facebook page. Fantastic stuff over there. Big thank you as usual to David and to all of you for your wonderful messages of support and continued shares and likes and comments. It really does help the channel grow and the community itself. Without further ado, guys, let's get into tonight's story, though, entitled The Night Visitor by Unknown, rewritten by D.Holley. Let's get straight into that. This is my third submission to Dead Man Talking, and this is not from my field notes or from any notes written by any member of the Timberline Bigfoot group. As I explained in an earlier narrative, I am primarily a Bigfoot researcher. In my 47-year career, I've read and heard some amazing stories. Some are true, some were manufactured to frighten novice Bigfoot researchers, some I'm not sure about. This is one of those stories. A little background information is needed here, because I don't want anyone making any rash or unfounded accusations. I first read the account I'm rewriting in an April issue of the publication called The Track Record, which was published by the Western Bigfoot Society. It was, and perhaps may continue to be, a newsletter mailed out to their subscribers. I no longer receive this newsletter, but I still shiver whenever I read this account. This, with a few minor changes, is the story which I posted on my Facebook account each Halloween. It is the story I'm submitting with your approval. There is a story, as I understand it correctly can be found in the book On the Track of Bigfoot by Marion T. Pace, which recounts a story which supposedly occurred prior to 1958 at a logging camp on the Chetco River, which was over the state line in Oregon, but no more than 50 air miles from Bluff Creek. The operation was small, employing a dozen men whose families lived in tents alongside the river. For several weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then, one morning, enormously large, human-like footprints were discovered in the riverbank. The loggers laughingly accused one another of having feet as big as chopping blocks. Everyone from the oldest to the youngest in camp measured his footprints against those of the unknown visitor. Since no one's feet were that large, one question was asked repeatedly. If these tracks weren't bear tracks, whose were they? Someone said there was a wild man living way up the river. He was, and some said, an irritable old devil who threatened to shoot anyone who approached his cabin. No matter how bad the weather was, he never wore a hat or boots, and he was always bareheaded and barefoot. Barefooted? Anyway, then the loggers speculated among themselves. The tracks were his. The mystery of the tracks was now solved, and the loggers were soon forgetting about them. However, several nights later, the night was filled with the sound of an eerie whistling, and angry, unnatural shrieks, which awakened the camp. In every tent, sleepy, tired men bounded out of their beds and grabbed their rifles and shotguns, assuming a wounded bear was nearby. Not one lighted a lamp for fear of attracting the beast. Frightened children were warned and admonished not to cry. The spine-chilling noises continued on and on throughout the night. Sometimes they seemed close by, and other times they seemed to come from the direction of the road or the river. But finally, the sound faded away into the distance, and quiet returned to the dark campsite. At daybreak, the men gathered together to talk. They debated whether it was a bear or a mountain lion. To satisfy themselves and erase their families' worries, half a dozen men searched about for a bear or mountain lion tracks. They found no mountain lion spoor at all, and no fresh bear tracks. However, at the edge of the clearing, beyond the first stand of the trees and dense undergrowth, they came upon more of the giant-sized human footprints. The men debated whether it was the old recluse, and they agreed they had to catch the demented man before he killed someone. So, as quietly as possible, the search party began backtracking along the line of footprints. These footprints led them out to the road several hundred yards above the camp, and up the road to the logging site. Here, they found where the wild man had emerged from the forest into the open area and prowled around tree stumps, piles of brush, and the machinery used in loading the logs onto the wagons. Then the loggers received a nasty shock. Massive, unwieldy tree limbs far too heavy for one man to handle had been pulled out of the tangled waste piles and had either been tossed aside like matchsticks or had been used to beat on the machinery. The story continues about how the loggers began to track the wild man and how they pressed on as far as they dared. They had followed the tracks leading away from the operation site to a point where the tracks plunged down a steep ravine. The gloomy depths of the ravine provided too many hiding places for whatever this creature was they were tracking and could be hiding. The Chetco Indians believed there were man-animals in the woods. The loggers were informed. These creatures had shared their hunting grounds with the Indians for generations. The Indians claimed the fierce-looking hairy creatures who walked upright like men were neither human or animal, and neither friendly nor hostile. They were, as the Indians said, simply there, like every other man or wild creature, and so the Indians simply left them alone. But very late on the third night, the frightening sounds were heard again. They could be heard faintly from the far off into the woods. People in the camp jerked upright in their beds as the whistling and the screams grew louder. In every tent, men pulled on their trousers and boots and readied their guns. Obviously, the night prowler, this night visitor if you will, seemed only 50 feet away. One man took desperate action, hastily fashioning a torch of oily rags and kindling. He set fire to it. Then, torch in one hand and his rifle in the other, he raced into the woods. Meantime, the man's wife called for help, and within minutes several men stumbled towards her in the darkness. They groaned when they learned their comrade had gone into the woods alone. None hesitated to follow, but minutes passed while one dashed off to fetch a lantern and the other supplied themselves with extra ammunition. Finally, the party headed into the woods in the direction from which the awful sounds were heard. They had covered only a short distance when the whistling and the shrieking stopped. The body of the men stopped and listened. There was a long silence, and then an outburst of bestial yowling, followed by human screams. Believing their friend was being attacked, the men fought their way through the undergrowth. The man with a lantern was in the lead. Moments later, their comrade appeared, collapsing into their arms. At first, he was too terrified to speak. His friends began firing their guns in an attempt to drive away this howling monster. Then, they gathered and wowed patiently for the poor man to gasp out the details. The man said, by the torchlight, he had followed a line of giant-sized footprints when suddenly came upon a huge creature covered with hair. A bear? One man asked. An ape! An ape of monstrous appeal, 7 or 8 feet tall, 2 axe handles wide across the shoulders, with beady yellow eyes and bared teeth. The torchlight must have blinded it because it stood still, one hand shading its eyes. Then it let out a tremendous roar. The man told his comrades he held the torch into its face, but instead of shooting, he ran away screaming towards camp. While his friends and companions did not doubt his word, they asked anxiously if he were positive the beast was an ape. Yes, he was positive. It really looked like an ape? One asked. It really did look like an ape, the man replied. Did it have fangs? Another asked. You bet. Claws? The man paused and replied sarcastically that he hadn't stayed around long enough to study the brute. But, after thinking it over, he said it had hands, like a man's. Only its hands were twice as large and covered with hair right down to the fingernails. Several nights later, 2 other loggers decided to chase the creature down and confront it. Their bodies were found. Their bodies had been slammed into against tree trunks and torn to pieces. A trail of blood-smeared footprints led off into the forest, and within 24 hours, the logging operation was deserted. A professional hunter was hired to track the beast down and kill it. He was also unsuccessful. The creature was never captured, nor its voice heard again. the most people could hope for was the creature had either moved away or had died. As I stated earlier, DMT, this is a story I read in the old Western Bigfoot Society newsletter, The Track Record. It's true, and it's a fantastic record of how dangerous some of these creatures can be. When pursuing these creatures in the field, please remind everyone, you're the invasive creature. You've come seeking them, and sometimes what you get isn't warm and fuzzy. Take care. David. Wow, fantastic stuff, David. Thank you ever so much for rewriting that and sending that my way. It was a pretty chilling encounter, no less, especially back in those days with oil lanterns. As ever, guys, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share and help build this community and channel. As ever, a big Merry Christmas from my family to yours. And above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.